She didn't scream. She didn't run. She just stood there in her kitchen, completely still, her hands pressed flat against the cold countertop, listening to the sound of his car pulling into the driveway. And in that moment, the way her shoulders tightened, the way her breath went shallow, the way her eyes moved to the clock on the wall like she was calculating something, you would have known, without a single word being spoken, that this was not a home. This was a prison. And the warden had just come back. But here is the part that nobody in that neighborhood, nobody at that church, nobody at that school pickup line ever knew. The woman standing in that kitchen that evening was not who he thought she was. And before that night was over, Raymond Holloway was going to learn the most painful lesson of his entire life. Before we go any further, let us ask you something. Have you ever looked at a couple, a well-dressed couple, a couple who shows up to cookouts and church anniversaries and neighborhood block parties, and thought to yourself, they seem fine, they seem happy? Because that is exactly what everyone thought about Raymond and Cheryl Holloway of Columbus, Ohio. Raymond was a project manager for a mid-sized construction firm. He coached Little League on Saturdays. He remembered people's birthdays. He was, by every visible measure, a good man. And Cheryl was warm and soft-spoken and always had something baking in the oven when the neighbors stopped by. They had 2 children, a boy and a girl, a golden retriever named Biscuit, and a house on Sycamore Lane with a wraparound porch that people slowed down to admire when they drove past. But here are the 3 questions that nobody in that neighborhood ever thought to ask. Why did Cheryl stop coming to the annual block party after year 3 of their marriage? Why did her twin sister, Dana, go from visiting 4 times a year to visiting 0? And why, on the night of October 14th, did Raymond Holloway refuse to call the police, even after what happened to him inside his own home? To understand the night of October 14th, you have to go back, way back. You have to go back to a 2-bedroom house in Dayton, Ohio, where twin girls named Cheryl and Dana Mitchell grew up sharing everything: a bedroom, a bathroom, a mother's attention, and an unspoken, ironclad agreement that they would always have each other's back. They were identical in every physical sense. Same dark brown eyes, same high cheekbones, same gap between their front teeth that they both learned to smile around. But anyone who knew them for more than 5 minutes understood immediately that these were 2 completely different human beings living inside matching bodies. Cheryl was the gentle one. She was the girl who brought home stray cats, who stayed after class to help struggling classmates, who cried at commercials and meant it. She wanted to be a school counselor. She wanted a family. She wanted the kind of quiet, steady life that her own childhood, marked by financial stress and a father who left when they were 9, had never given her. Dana was something else entirely. Dana was the one who stepped between Cheryl and a bully in the 4th grade and didn't blink. Dana was the one who started martial arts training at 13 after watching a documentary about a woman who fought off an attacker and who never stopped. By the time these 2 women were in their mid-20s, Dana held a black belt in Krav Maga and had become a certified self-defense instructor in Atlanta, Georgia. She taught classes 3 evenings a week to women of all ages. She believed, with every fiber of her being, that no woman should ever feel powerless in her own body. The irony of what was happening to her sister, 3 states away, is the kind of thing that would keep you up at night if you let yourself think about it too long. Cheryl met Raymond Holloway at a work conference in Cincinnati in the spring of 2014. She was 28 years old. He was 31. And if you had been in that hotel lobby when they met, you would have understood immediately why she fell for him. Raymond Holloway was exactly the kind of man that fills in the empty spaces of a childhood like Cheryl. He was tall, well put together, funny in the effortless way that makes a room lean in. He remembered the small things, the name of the book she mentioned once, the fact that she took her coffee with oat milk, the anniversary of a difficult day she had mentioned in passing. He called when he said he would call. He showed up when he said he would show up. He made Cheryl Mitchell feel, for the first time in her adult life, like she was someone worth showing up for. Dana met him 3 months into the relationship. She shook his hand, looked him in the eye, and smiled the way you smile when you're still deciding something. She would later say, years later, when everything had already happened, that she noticed something in the first hour. A subtle shift in the way Raymond spoke when another man complimented Cheryl's laugh. A flash of something behind his eyes that was gone almost before it appeared. But Dana was 28 years old, and she was not in the habit of blowing up her sister's happiness based on a feeling she couldn't name. So she smiled, and she kept watching. Raymond proposed 14 months after that hotel lobby in Cincinnati. He got down on one knee in the living room of Cheryl's apartment while snow fell outside the window, and Cheryl said yes before he had finished the sentence. The wedding was in April of 2015. It was small, intimate, exactly what Cheryl had always wanted. Dana was the maid of honor. She stood at that altar and held her sister's bouquet and watched Raymond slide the ring onto Cheryl's finger, and she felt the specific kind of love that only a twin can feel, that profound, cellular recognition that the person you are made of is happy. What she did not know, what neither of them knew, was that the ring going onto Cheryl's finger that afternoon was not the beginning of the life she had been promised. It was the beginning of something that would take 6 years to fully name. Before we go further into Cheryl's story, we just want to pause and say, if you're watching this right now, wherever you are in the world, we would love to hear from you. Drop a comment below and let us know where you're watching from. We'd love to build this community with you. And if you haven't already, please hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming stories. Now, back to Cheryl. The first time Raymond hit her, they had been married for 11 months. It was a Tuesday in March. He had come home from work carrying the specific kind of tension that Cheryl was still learning to read: tight jaw, clipped responses, a silence that had weight to it. She had made dinner. The chicken was slightly overcooked. She didn't think anything of it. Raymond sat down at the table, cut into the chicken, set his fork down, and looked at her with an expression she had never seen on his face before. What followed started as an argument. His voice rising, her voice trying to stay calm, the children, their son Marcus, 3 years old, their daughter Lily, 18 months, asleep upstairs, thank God asleep upstairs. And then, without warning, without escalation that she could have braced for, his hand connected with the side of her face. The sound in that kitchen was something Cheryl would hear in her sleep for years afterward. She didn't cry immediately. She was too stunned. She stood there with her hand against her cheek, and she looked at her husband and she thought, with the clear, uncomplicated thought of someone in shock, this cannot be real. Raymond cried that night. He dropped to his knees on the kitchen floor and he held her hands and he told her he didn't know what had come over him, that he was under enormous pressure at work, that he had never done anything like that in his life, and he swore on his children's lives, that he never would again. Cheryl believed him. She believed him because she loved him, yes, but also because the research on this is unambiguous and important to understand. Studies on domestic violence consistently show that, after a first incident, abusers almost universally present with remorse, promises, and affection, what researchers call the honeymoon phase of the abuse cycle. The victim is not naive. The victim is responding to a deliberate, calculated behavioral pattern that the abuser may not even be fully conscious of, but that is effective nonetheless. Cheryl believed Raymond because Raymond gave her every reason to believe him, and so she said nothing, to no one. What happened over the next 6 years in the Holloway house on Sycamore Lane was not a series of random explosions. It was something far more structured than that. Domestic violence experts describe the pattern that Cheryl was living inside as the power and control wheel, a cycle of tactics that abusers use, consciously or not, to maintain dominance over their partners. For Raymond, those tactics were financial control first. Within the first year of marriage, he had taken over all the accounts, given Cheryl a monthly allowance for household expenses, and positioned it as efficiency. He was the one with the business background. It made sense for him to manage the money. Cheryl accepted this. Then came isolation. It began with small suggestions. Raymond thought her college friend Tamara was a bad influence. He thought her coworker Sandra talked too much about her own relationship problems. He thought the Saturday girls' brunches were a waste of time when there was so much to do around the house. Each suggestion was delivered reasonably, individually, with a logic Cheryl could almost follow. But the cumulative effect, and this is precisely how isolation functions, was that within 3 years of their wedding, Cheryl had stopped seeing virtually everyone she had known before Raymond. And then there was Dana. Separating Cheryl from her twin was Raymond's most deliberate and most patient project. It didn't happen with a ban or an ultimatum. That would have been too obvious, even for Cheryl. It happened through a sustained, low-grade campaign of criticism. Dana was too aggressive. Dana had always been competitive with Cheryl. Dana didn't respect the boundaries of their marriage. Dana called too much and visited too often and had opinions about things that were none of her business. None of this was delivered as accusation. It was delivered as concern, as Raymond looking out for the peace of their home. And Cheryl, exhausted, increasingly isolated, increasingly uncertain of her own judgment, began to pull back from the one person who, had she known the full truth, would have come immediately. The physical abuse continued on its cycle. An incident, remorse, a period of calm that grew shorter every time. Another incident. By year 3, Cheryl had learned to identify the warning signs the way you learn to identify weather, the particular tightness in Raymond's jaw, the way he handled his car keys when he came through the door, the temperature of his silences. She had become an expert in the micromanagement of another person's volatility. She had stopped thinking of this as survival. She had simply begun to think of it as life. She wore long sleeves through 2 consecutive summers. She learned which makeup concealed bruising most effectively. She told the pediatrician, when her daughter Lily asked why Mommy had a mark on her arm, that she had bumped into the corner of the kitchen counter. The pediatrician nodded. The pediatrician did not ask a follow-up question, and Cheryl drove home from that appointment and sat in the driveway for 11 minutes before she felt steady enough to go inside. 3 states away in Atlanta, Dana was living a life that looked, from the outside, like a full and purposeful one. She ran her self-defense studio 6 days a week. She had a close group of friends, a small apartment she had decorated herself, and a deep, abiding pride in the work she did, watching women walk into her studio frightened and walk out month after month something different, something more rooted. But underneath all of that, there was Cheryl. There was always Cheryl. The calls had become less frequent over the years, and Dana had noticed, had told herself it was the natural rhythm of 2 adult women living different lives. But the calls themselves had changed in quality in a way Dana struggled to articulate. Cheryl was still warm, still laughed at the right moments, but there was something underneath the warmth now. A flatness, a carefulness, like she was speaking from inside a room she didn't want Dana to see. Dana began paying closer attention. She noticed that Cheryl never suggested visiting. She noticed that when Dana raised the possibility of coming to Columbus, Cheryl always had a reason it wasn't a good time right now. She noticed that in their video calls, Cheryl consistently angled the camera so that only one side of her face was fully visible. She noticed that Cheryl never, in the course of 2 full years, once complained about Raymond. Not once. And if you have ever been in a long-term relationship, you understand that a person who never once complains about their partner is not describing a perfect marriage. They are describing a silence that has been enforced. It was a Tuesday evening in October when Dana called and Cheryl answered, and for the first 30 seconds neither of them said anything at all. Just breathing. Just the sound of 2 people who had come from the same body, sitting in the silence that had built up between them like sediment. And then Cheryl said, very quietly, almost too quietly, "Dana, I need to tell you something." And Dana, who had been waiting for those words for 2 years, said, "I know, tell me everything." What Cheryl told her sister that evening took 47 minutes. Dana did not interrupt. She did not gasp or exclaim or ask why Cheryl hadn't said something sooner, because she understood, in the way that only someone who has spent years teaching abused women to trust themselves again could understand, that asking why she waited is exactly the wrong question. The right question is, how do we move from here? What Cheryl described was 6 years of a life lived at someone else's temperature. The financial control that had left her without the ability to access emergency funds. The isolation that had stripped away every person who might have helped her see clearly. The physical incidents, she still could not call them beatings, still used softer language, still said, "He gets rough sometimes," the way you describe a weather pattern, and the specific fear that kept her inside all of it, which was not only fear for herself, but fear for Marcus and Lily. She had told herself for 6 years that staying was protecting them, that a disrupted home was worse than an imperfect one. That Raymond, whatever he was to her behind closed doors, was a present and involved father to those children. And she was terrified with the specific bone-deep terror of a woman who has been financially controlled for 6 years, that if she tried to leave and failed, the consequences would be unsurvivable. Dana listened to all of it. She asked 3 questions when Cheryl finished. How long since the last incident? Cheryl said 4 days. How bad? Cheryl was quiet for a moment, then said bad enough. Are the kids safe right now? Cheryl said yes, they were with Raymond's mother for the week. And then Dana said the 7 words that Cheryl would later describe as the moment something inside her finally exhaled. She said, "I'm getting on a plane, don't tell him." Dana landed in Columbus on a Thursday morning. She took a rideshare to a hotel 6 miles from the Holloway house and called Cheryl from the lobby. When Cheryl opened the hotel room door 20 minutes later, Dana did not say anything for a long moment. She just looked at her sister, her own face, carrying damage she had not put there, and pulled her into the kind of embrace that doesn't require words because the words would be insufficient anyway. They sat for 3 hours. Cheryl walked Dana through everything: Raymond's schedule, his triggers, the way he moved through the house when he was building toward an episode, the way he announced his arrival through the quality of the silence he brought through the door. Dana listened to all of it with the focused, systematic attention of someone who was not building a reaction, she was building a plan. The idea of the swap came from Dana. Cheryl's response was immediate terror, not because she doubted Dana's capability, but because 6 years of being told, in 100 different ways, that she had no power had done its work. She was afraid of what would happen if the plan failed. She was afraid of what Raymond would do to Dana. She was afraid, most of all, of the thing that abused women are most afraid of, which is not the abuse itself, but the moment they stop tolerating it, because that moment is the most dangerous one. Dana acknowledged all of it. She did not dismiss the fear. She sat with it, the way she sat with fear in her studio, the way she taught women to sit with it, not to conquer it, but to stop letting it make decisions on your behalf. And then she laid out the plan with the calm precision of a woman who had spent 15 years thinking about exactly this kind of situation. They were identical. They had fooled teachers, neighbors, their own mother. They had done it 100 times as children for reasons that were trivial. Now they would do it once more for a reason that was not. Cheryl would leave through the back. Dana would be there when Raymond got home. The preparation took the rest of Thursday and all of Friday. Dana studied Cheryl the way an actor studies a role, not the surface of her, but the specific physical vocabulary of a woman who has spent 6 years making herself small. The way Cheryl held her shoulders when Raymond was in the room. The way she moved through the kitchen, efficient but never relaxed, always oriented toward the door, always aware of distance. The slight downward angle of her chin. The voice that had learned to be agreeable on the first response, not the second. Dana absorbed all of it. She also, quietly and without telling Cheryl the specifics, assessed the layout of the house in her mind from everything Cheryl described. Entry points, the distance between rooms, the geography of a space that Raymond had always controlled. On Saturday morning, Cheryl received a text from Raymond. He was finishing up work and would be home by 6. He used the word home. Dana read the message over Cheryl's shoulder and set the phone back down on the hotel nightstand without comment. They spent Saturday afternoon helping Cheryl make calls she had quietly, carefully been preparing to make for 2 months. Her attorney, a woman named Patricia Haynes, who specialized in domestic violence cases, had already been briefed. Documents had already been gathered. A plan had been in place in Cheryl's mind for longer than she had admitted, even to herself. She had been waiting for a window. Dana was the window. At 5:30 on Saturday evening, Cheryl changed into her street clothes, looked at her sister, her own face, steady and ready in a way hers had not been in years, and said, "Be careful." Dana said, "Go." Cheryl walked out the back door of her own house. Dana walked to the kitchen and poured herself a glass of water and stood at the counter and waited. Raymond Holloway pulled into the driveway at 6:14 on a Saturday evening. Dana heard the car before she heard the door. She noticed, with the particular attunement of someone who had spent years training her nervous system to read threat, the quality of the engine cut sharp and abrupt, the kind that signals a mood. She set her glass down. She heard his key in the lock. She did not turn around. Raymond came through the door, and Dana heard him set his keys on the hook by the entrance. She knew exactly where that hook was because Cheryl had told her, and she heard the particular silence of a man deciding which version of himself to be tonight. He came into the kitchen. He said something dismissive about the state of the counter. His voice had an edge to it that was looking for a surface to cut against. Dana turned around slowly and looked at him, and in that first half second she saw exactly what Cheryl had described, the assessment, the entitlement, the casual assumption of power in a space he considered his. What he did not see, because he had no reason to look for it, was the specific quality of stillness in the woman in front of him. Not the stillness of someone bracing. The stillness of someone ready. Raymond moved toward her. He said something with his voice raised, and then he raised his hand. He did not finish that motion. What happened next lasted less than 45 seconds. Dana was not reckless and she was not cruel. She was precise. She was a trained martial artist and a certified self-defense instructor with 15 years of practice, and she responded to Raymond Holloway with exactly the proportional, controlled, and devastating proficiency that represented the full distance between who he thought was standing in that kitchen and who was actually there. When it was over, Raymond was on the kitchen floor. He was not seriously injured, but he was completely, thoroughly, humiliatingly on the floor. Dana stood over him. She was not breathing hard. She looked down at him with the kind of calm that is more frightening than anger, and she said, very quietly, "My name is Dana Mitchell. I am Cheryl's twin sister, and I want you to understand something clearly. She is already gone. The lawyer already has everything. And if you ever, in any form, in any way, through any channel, attempt to reach her or those children with anything other than the legal paperwork you are about to receive, I will come back, and next time I won't be trying to leave you functional." She picked up her bag from beside the refrigerator, where she had placed it 3 hours earlier. She walked out the front door. She called a rideshare from the porch. Raymond Holloway did not call the police that night. He would not call them the following day either. He would not, in fact, tell a single person what had happened in that kitchen for as long as any record of him suggests. Because there is no version of that story that Raymond Holloway could tell without answering the question of why a woman he outweighed by 60 pounds had put him on his own kitchen floor. And that question had no answer that preserved a single thing he had spent 6 years constructing. Cheryl Holloway filed for divorce on Monday morning, 4 days after the night of October 14th. Patricia Haynes, her attorney, filed simultaneously for a temporary protective order, which was granted the same afternoon. The documentation Cheryl had been quietly assembling over the preceding 2 months was substantial. Photographs, medical records from visits where she had attributed injuries to accidents, a log she had kept on a notes app on a secondary phone Raymond did not know existed, testimony from her pediatrician, who, with the benefit of clarity and a direct question from a family law attorney, was able to provide a detailed account of the visit where Lily had asked about Mommy's arm. Raymond Holloway, faced with the documentation in front of his own attorney, did not contest the protective order. He did not contest primary custody. He accepted visitation terms that were supervised for the first year. His attorney would later indicate to Patricia Haynes's office that his client had decided against litigation. Raymond's decision not to fight had nothing to do with generosity. It had everything to do with the calculation of a man who knew that a contested custody case would require him to sit in a courtroom and answer questions under oath about the state of his marriage. And Raymond Holloway, whatever else he was, understood that the story that would emerge in that courtroom was not one that would leave him with anything worth protecting. Cheryl and the children moved into a rental house in Westerville, a suburb of Columbus, 7 weeks after the filing. It was a 3-bedroom house with a yard and a porch and a neighborhood that had absolutely nothing to recommend it except that it was hers. She chose the paint colors. She arranged the furniture the way she had always wanted furniture arranged and never been allowed to. She put Lily's drawings on the refrigerator with the big, colorful magnets, and she let Marcus pick his own bedding, and she made pancakes on Sunday mornings without once thinking about whether the sound of the pan on the stove was going to be the thing that shifted someone's mood. Recovery from 6 years of sustained abuse does not happen in a weekend. Anyone who has lived it or loved someone through it understands that the body and the mind absorb what they have been conditioned to expect, and recalibrating that conditioning is slow, non-linear work. Cheryl began seeing a therapist named Dr. Angela Moore 8 weeks after she left. She went every Thursday at 4 o'clock, and she sat in that office, and for the first time in a very long time, said exactly what she thought without performing a calculation first. She talked about the guilt, and this is the part that people who have never been in an abusive relationship often find confusing, but it is almost universal among survivors. The guilt of leaving, The guilt about the children's disrupted life. The guilt that comes from loving someone who hurt you for years and not being fully sure yet how to stop. She talked about the specific, disorienting grief of mourning a marriage and a man who never fully existed, because the Raymond she had married in April of 2015 was, in many ways, a construction. The man who had shown up consistently over the following 6 years was the real one. And grieving the loss of a fiction while also navigating the reality is a psychological experience that does not have clean language around it. Dr. Moore helped her find her own language. Slowly, carefully, week by week. Dana came to visit in January, 3 months after the night of October 14th. She stayed for 10 days. She and Cheryl sat on the porch of the Westerville house in the cold and drank coffee and talked the way they had talked as teenagers in Dayton. Without editing, without performance, without the weight of things left unsaid. On the 4th evening, Cheryl's daughter Lily climbed into Dana's lap, looked up at her aunt's face, her mother's face, and said, "You look just like Mommy." Dana said, "I know, baby. That's because we come from the same place." Cheryl was in the kitchen when she heard that exchange. She stood at the counter with her hand pressed flat against the surface. The same counter, the same gesture, but an entirely different woman in an entirely different kitchen, breathing an entirely different air. And she realized, standing there, that she had not listened for the sound of a car in the driveway in 11 weeks. Here is what the research tells us, and it is important to say it plainly. In the United States, more than 10 million people experience domestic violence every year. 1 in 4 women will experience severe physical violence from an intimate partner in their lifetime. And the single most dangerous moment in an abusive relationship is not any of the incidents that precede it. It is the moment of leaving. The moment a victim moves toward the door is statistically the most likely moment for escalation, for retaliation, for the worst possible outcomes. Which means that every woman who leaves, every single one, does so knowing that the act of trying to get free is the most dangerous thing she will ever do. Cheryl Holloway knew that. She had known it for 2 years before she made that call on a Tuesday night in October. She had done the math on her own safety 100 times and put the phone down 100 times and gone back to calculating his moods and managing his temperature and telling herself the children needed stability. What changed was not her circumstances. What changed was that she finally told someone the truth. That is the thing about silence. It does not protect you. It protects the person who gave you reason to be silent. Cheryl Holloway is, as far as this story knows, doing well. Her children are in school. She returned to work part-time in the spring following her separation. She has not remarried. She runs once a week in the early morning before the kids wake up in the neighborhood by herself, and she told Dr. Moore that those runs are the time she feels most like herself, moving through open space, at her own pace, in her own direction, without asking anyone's permission. Dana still runs her self-defense studio in Atlanta. She added a Thursday evening class specifically for women who have left or are leaving abusive situations. She does not charge for it. She says it is the most important thing she does. The twins talk every Sunday, without fail. And at the end of every call, without planning it, without making it a ritual, one of them always says, "Take care of yourself." And the other always answers, "I always do now." If this story moved you, if it made you think of someone, if it brought something up that you have been carrying quietly, we want you to know that you are not alone in that. Drop a comment below. Tell us what part of this story stayed with you. Tell us where you are watching from. This community spans people from all walks of life, all corners of this country, and every voice in that comment section matters. If you have not subscribed yet, please do it now, because the stories we cover on this channel are the ones that most people are too afraid to say out loud, and they deserve to be heard. We will see you in the next one.